Friends, welcome everyone. My name's Tami Simon. I'm the founder of Sounds True, and I'm so glad you're here with us. Steady under fire. That's what we'll be talking about. I'm here with InnerMBA core faculty member, professor at the Peter F. Drucker School of Management, friend Jeremy Hunter. Let me share a little bit about Jeremy that you might not know in his formal bio. These are two facts that I love about him. One, his grandfather was indeed a sumo wrestler. Yes, Jeremy has this interesting combination. He's both has this air of lightness about him, and he's definitely a heavyweight. Here's the second thing. He has won the Professor of the Year award 9 times at the Peter F. Drucker School. And that's an award that's decided upon by the students, which I always find so impressive. And all of the people in the past 5 cohorts who have gone through the InnerMBA, I think, have also found, I can't say all of the people because that would be an exaggeration, and I'm not exaggerating here. So many of the students have found Jeremy. He has this incredible ability to connect. So I'm so glad you're here with us, and we'll have the chance to learn from him. Now, let me just give you a little bit of a sense. I couldn't say that, Jeremy, all of the people. I mean, if you know what I mean? They say you can't win over all of the people, all that something's wrong if that's the case. I myself am practicing what's called the art of repulsion. You have to repel some people some of the time in order to be taking a stand somewhere. Okay, back to our topic. Here we go. Let me tell you a little bit about what we're going to be covering today. We're going to be talking about the nervous system assault that many of us are experiencing a whole lot of the time. We're going to talk about how we can work with our nervous systems to be more regulated and effective in actualizing our purpose in the world. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the InnerMBA, which has been newly created to address these specific times we're in consultation with the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley. And then at the end, those of you who are here in the Zoom room with us will have a chance to write in your questions, and I'll bring forward as many as I can to Jeremy. And with that, welcome, Jeremy.
Yay. Hi. I'll try not to be too repulsive.
No, just the right amount. Just the right amount. Our team came up with this title, Steady Under Fire. And they said, what do you think of this? We're going to be talking about managing your nervous system at work. What do you think, Tami? And I said, well, do you all know that Jeremy actually lost his house 18 months ago? When you send him this title and ask him, do you think this is a good title? I want you to be sensitive to that, okay? Be attuned to how this may strike him. So I wonder if you can share, just as a way to start here on a personal note, how you went through what I imagine a crisis like that, the most extreme nervous system dysregulation, really, or one of the most extreme types that people can imagine, finding your house burned down.
Well, it wasn't boring, that was for sure. But let me share a little slide here. This was the day after I think, as everyone probably knows, in January of 2025, there were massive wildfires in Los Angeles and in our neighborhood, Altadena. About 10,000 structures were destroyed overnight, and I think 18 to 20 people were killed, and tens of thousands of people were displaced from their home. And so, for whatever reason, we got it into our mind to go see the house the next day. The neighborhood was actually still on fire, and we get there. Our neighbor's house, interestingly, and many of our neighbors' houses hadn't burned down. And right just outside of the frame of this photo is our neighbor's house, which is still there. And we're looking at this, and about 2 seconds after I took this photograph, my son turns around with this gleam in his eye, and he says, "Papa, fresh start." And I I realized, oh, that's how we're gonna approach this. And uh, one of total non-resistance, actually. And that kind of gave a license to really see this as an opportunity for reinvention. And I think it really hit home for my wife and I when we were going, about 15 minutes after this, going through the rubble, and everything that was okay that we found, which was not much, was all stuff that we didn't like. And like the mug that we didn't want, that we didn't throw out, or I don't know, everything we found, almost everything except for a couple of things, were just stuff we didn't like. Um, and I think my wife and I looked at each other and said, what are we doing? And I think right then and there we just decided to let go of our old life and turn that into a kind of new adventure. Now that was in the immediate part. The months after that, and still now, it's a year and a half, what, year and 7 months later. But I would say the immediate next few months were really all about nervous system regulation. There's so many unknowns, still so many unknowns, whether we can actually rebuild the house and all of that stuff. And I think one of the things that I also wrote about was something called the jolt, which is this sudden remembrance of this thing you had that is now no longer there. Photographs, stuff we bought on our honeymoon, art that I had purchased that we'll never be able to find again. And the jolt is this kind of psychic hairball of pain and regret and uh, and kind of coupled with this intensity. And we made a deal that whenever the jolt showed up, we let it pass through us, and that it was not pleasant, and it is occasionally still not pleasant, but it was a kind of direct application of non-resistance. And I think we knew that if we were to spend a lot of energy suppressing feeling the jolt, then that would not be a good thing. That would mean we'd be spending a lot of energy just trying to push down other energy. But that practice of learning how to sit through this pain and regret, I think in the immediate term was really incredibly helpful. It was essential in terms of how do you regulate. And then I think the other thing was that I had, this is something we're going to talk about in the InnerMBA, but as a family, we created a structure for ourselves that was already there, of how do we, what are things that we put in our calendar that are there just to support us and help us, and because as you said, we live in a world of constant nervous system dysregulation, and what we call green zone structures, which is what I'll talk about in my part of the program, was already there in place even before we had thought about a fire or whatnot, and they were already on the calendar. And one of them was, I had bought tickets to Annie the musical months and months before, and suddenly, like 2 weeks later, I look on the calendar, oh, we have Annie. What do we want to do? It's like, okay, well, we got the tickets, so let's go. And it turns out, watching a musical about an irrepressibly optimistic orphan girl was really a salve to us. And I think one of our cherished post-fire memories was having family sing along on the way home to Annie, or from Annie. But I think that there is this need for all of us to think through not just how do I work harder and how do I rest, which I think is also essential, but how do you create structures in your life that actually give you energy, and how do you be intentional about it? Anyway, I could go on and on and on, but I think those are my two big answers to your question. Let me take the screen off.
Now, Jeremy, you had been teaching in the InnerMBA and in other environments, managing your nervous system at work as a core competency that people need before this fire happened. Did you have a sense that the universe was like, okay, here's your like PhD test? What of all these things have you taught are you actually going to be able to
Yeah.
put into use now under this kind of stress?
Oh yeah, it was definitely. I think that was my first thought actually. Um, was okay. What do you actually know? And I think what I learned is that I actually do know, and it's more than just like a good idea in my head. It's something that as a family we practice, and you know I like to say that physiology trumps psychology, and all the good thoughts we have in our head um, are going to be negated by a physiology that is either prone to jumping into defense or attack or shutting down. And and so how do you build capacity to hold stimulus basically, and then to bounce back, and then what we can talk about later, like how do you build what I call green zone capacity so that you're less likely to do any of those things, to immediately default into a fear or attack response or a shutdown response. And I think that's core to what the program is about for sure, but it's also core to my own teaching at the Drucker School. And
Just to, say a little bit more about that, I think, 10 years ago, even, you wouldn't hear in a professional management course necessarily people talking about managing your nervous system. This whole notion that how we work with our body state and specifically the nervous system is really a relatively new conversation that we're having in the context of being a business professional. And I wonder how you see that.
yeah, and it's still a relatively new conversation. It's kind of amazing to me. Most leadership studies or development programs kind of stop at the neck, and and that they're very conceptual. But the plain and totally obvious fact is that we live in a body, and that the body is our kind of consciousness suit for navigating the world, and that body has things to say, and and that if we don't address the fact we live in a body that can shift instantaneously into defense, attack, or shutdown, then you're leaving a lot of stuff on the table in terms of uh, what's possible for human beings, and why things are so dysfunctional the way they are. Is that we think we're rational, and yet people are having these kind of irrational reactions all the time, and we don't have a way to talk about it or make sense of it or do anything about it. So it's but I think it's like dealing with reality of how we actually are as human beings.
One of your, I think, brilliant introductions into the management discussion has been to take what sometimes when people teach about the nervous system, it can get quite complicated. They're bringing in different ideas from polyvagal theory, which can get very technical. And you've simplified it, if I can say, in a way that makes it very applicable, practical, friendly for us in the workplace. And I wonder, with that in mind, if you can share the model you've developed that you've now been teaching people.
Sure, it originates with Dan Siegel, so I don't want to take all the credit, but and the notion is, let me just put up a slide here, and the idea is that you have a nervous system that, let's see here, can you see that? All right, that should work.
It's working well.
All right. So we have red zone, which is what probably most people associate with stress. And this is a state of like heightened energy. It can also have a positive aspect of kind of moving into protection, as well as attack. But here's the part of you that wants to run out of the room when your boss says something crazy. And this is also 2 o'clock in the morning, and you can't sleep because your body's still in a red zone state. Or what I, from a team point of view, like what it does to relationship is also important, because what it usually does in relationship is turn the other person into an enemy, whether that person is your boss, your team, your spouse, your child, the person in front of you on the street while you're trying to get to your appointment that you're late for, right? Those people turn into enemies, and so they're not. It's not just a state that's happening inside me. It's a state that's also affecting your capacity to connect with the world. And then there's the gray zone, which is a kind of shutdown, and this is the place of depression. And I think we landed on gray because the world becomes colorless. I know that in my life, when I have been in states of chronic depression, color is the first thing that leaves. And so, but here's where you don't want to get out of bed, you don't want to see other people. It's a place of sadness, it's a place of withdrawal. And in a mild form, you know, how it shows up at the office is like, my body's here, but the rest of me somewhere else, right? Or we're nodding through the meeting, but there's no real commitment. And so then there's what's actually healthy. And I think where I differ from people who are more used to working in a trauma lens is that if you see the green zone not as a zone of resilience or bounce back, or even tolerance for that matter, the zone of tolerance, I think, is another thing that's commonly talked about. It's like, I actually am more interested in cultivating vitality, which has no upper limit, and that's the green zone, right? And so if you shift your lens to the cultivation of vitality as opposed to like the cultivation of the ability to just tolerate more and more stuff, I think you get a very interesting and a much more lively way of looking at the world. And to say something about relationship is that it's in the green zone that we're actually capable of having a relationship, a real relationship, where we're listening and being able to step into the world of the other and adjust and have humor and perspective and intelligence and real intelligence. And so the green zone isn't just about feeling good. It's really about how do we create results that actually work. And I think seeing things in terms of colors rather than brain parts makes things more interesting, and I think more acceptable, and more accessible. And what I find is that work groups will often just immediately adopt this language because it's so obvious, right?
I think let's leave this slide up for a moment. And to say a bit more, you describe something that you call a green zone leader. Would that be someone who spends 51% of their time in the green zone, 99%? Like when do we get, is this something we return to again and again? How do you see it?
Yeah, I think it's a place where it's more or less the default operating system of a person, that they are. It doesn't mean that they don't get angry or that they don't feel low sometimes, but rather like this state of health and vitality is the place from which they engage the world. And I think that we all know that leaders' nervous system states are contagious, right? Leaders set the tone for their group, and that the groups feel the consciousness of the leader. And because we all know that we have all probably experienced the red zone leader creates a red zone team, right? And then eventually over time that team will sink into the gray zone, that everyone eventually checks out or they leave the organization. So a green zone leader is somebody. I have a student, Heather Dyer, who I'm very fond of talking about because she's really the kind of archetype of this. And she works in the world of water in California, which I think everyone knows is kind of a tenuous proposition. And she went through an amazing transformation of her own healing. So first is really like looking at what are the parts of me that are stuck in the red zone or gray zone and healing them. And because those are places that are draining energy from aliveness, essentially. And and that when that happens, and that when you take time to build support structures, I like to say that you're making your green zone wider, you're making your green zone greener, and that what that creates is a not only a person that doesn't see the world in terms of an adversarial relationship, it creates a person who sees the world as a place of creative potential. And I think one of the things I know I do in my own classes is we focus on result, right? That what makes the InnerMBA different than, say, a class on learning how to meditate is that we put result at the center. And when result is at the center, then you get a pragmatic view of like, what are my actions doing? Right, let me see if I can find the slide here. Like, what am I doing? And how am I being? Who am I being in this moment? And how is my being in the moment opening up potential or possibility for myself or my team or my organization? And how does that turn into result? And what the green zone leader does is first create structures in their life to help make their green zone greener or wider. And then what that person does is basically infect everyone around them. And I know what Heather does is spend a lot of time building trusting relationships with first with herself, and then with her team, and then from the team, from the larger organization, and then their stakeholders, and then in this world of water, the community that it's meant to serve. And so it's I would say creating the optimal state to be able to meet challenge, and in a productive and positive way. And what she has done, and many of the green zone leaders I have had the great opportunity to work with, is that they create results that people think are impossible. And part of what makes that happen is that the level of connection and trust that they have with the people they're working with is so high that they're able to move a lot faster and in directions that are unpredictable. And in that unpredictability, they create great things.
I love that, Jeremy. I want to go back because you introduced, when you said, let me find that slide, and it was the slide that had now in the center as you were talking about results. And I wonder if you'd be willing to go back to that slide. Yeah, you find your slide so quickly. It's very impressive. Could you explain this slide?
Sure. So what's happening here is that I see the world in terms of moments, right? And I think this is also unique to the things we do, is that most leadership stuff sees things as people, right? Like, and it's good stuff. Like, what are your strengths and your North Star and all of those things? That's super helpful. But what this does is shift the unit of analysis to the moment. Like, what's actually happening to you, right? And so let's just say something happens. The phone rings and you see it's your most difficult client, right? Then that registers. And then in your body, you have a reaction. And that reaction is almost always opaque to us. If you don't have some kind of training, that reaction happens, and then it just charges into taking action, and it generates a result. And it's usually a result you don't want. And so what makes this, I think, interesting, especially for people who are action oriented, is that we learn how to develop in the moment this awareness of like, what's happening inside me? What are the stories in my head? What are the emotions I'm experiencing? And how does that shut down or open up what I perceive to be choices? And then the menu of actions that I want to take, and then eventually the result I get. And that the result is the feedback you have about your relationship with reality. And what we do over time is that you train yourself to make a different kind of choice, and you keep doing that over and over again, and you get a different kind of future. And at some level that's simple, but basically you turn left when you habitually turn right, and then that will generate a different result.
It takes a certain amount of inner awareness, inner
Yeah,
tracking. You have to be able to see what's going on and where that choice point is.
absolutely. And that's where the structure is essential. Whether that's a meditation practice or something that helps you feel more alive. But building that structure into your life is supportive of that process, I think.
Okay, and let's go back to the original framework slide of the 3 zones, because I have a few questions for you about that. So let's say here you are and you started a meeting and you were in the green zone, but somebody said something that was offensive or that you took umbrage at or whatever. And before you know it, you're in a protect frame. And, it could be even more than that. You could be angry. What have you found are the ways to return to the green zone on the spot?
Sometimes it's a question: what do I want right now? Like, what's the purpose of this meeting? And I mean, I can give you an example of that from my life. That in the post-fire world, we have to deal with all kinds of bureaucracy. And one of the deals I made with myself was that everybody I had to deal with, I would not project my emotions onto them, and no matter how badly I was feeling. And there were these moments where I just really wanted to scream my head off. And I would ask myself, what is most important from this conversation? Like, what is most important from this conversation, despite the fact I might want to kill the person that I'm talking to? And that was one. That was step one, was to like be clear about what was actually most important. Step two, another thing, I don't know if it's step two, but it's another step. It's another tool you can pull out of your bag, is like I take the palms of my hand and I put them on that tabletop, and we can practice this maybe if we have time, is that I just sense into the tabletop. And because the tabletop is solid and it is unchanging, and that solid unchanging place gives my attention somewhere to go rather than getting caught up in my frustration. And it might be also like your feet on the floor, or it might be your body sitting in the chair, but tuning into solidity, which by grace of gravity, which is constantly here on planet Earth, you can always tune into something solid. And then allowing your attention to rest into that solidity buys you time to have your nervous system return back into the green zone. I would say those would be the two easiest things to deploy in the moment.
And, you mentioned yourself this notion of the gray zone, and that you've had experiences in your life where you found yourself in a depressed state, a shutdown state. What have you found works in the moment when that's what's happening and you need to bring yourself to the green zone?
I think doing something enlivening. First, from a bigger point of view, it's probably just more rest. But in the moment, I find something physical actually is super helpful. Whether it's doing push-ups somewhere out of sight, or a cold shower, I think is one of my favorite tools for that. Jumping jacks, but it's about getting more energy into your body.
And, we're going to do a practice soon, I hope, as part of this session together, Jeremy, where you give people an opportunity to become more aware, to start to work with this model in some way themselves. But before we do, I do have a couple more questions for you, because it's one thing to learn, what do I do on the spot? And that's really useful. But you've emphasized already, you've pointed to it in this conversation, this notion of green zone, architecting it into your life, that it's a way of living, a resource you can call on. So it's not just these in the moment, quote unquote, nervous system hacks. It's a
Right.
bigger whole way of of architecting your life. And I wonder if you can speak to that.
Yeah, I I lived for 17 years with chronic illness and what was potentially terminal illness, and I had to learn how to be alive. And it was every day. It was today going to be the day that was going to be my last one. Was the question I lived with for 17 years, and I realized that I couldn't just grit my way through it. I had to. I had to. I was 20 years old when I was first diagnosed, and I had to make a life. And so I learned, but through trial and error, um, you have to think about your own aliveness and what's supporting your own aliveness, and that has to be reflected in your calendar. It wasn't just a good idea. That there have to be things you're doing that are reflective of what makes you feel vital and alive. And and I think that I think there what makes this more than just a stress management conversation is that I think probably true for this audience is a desire to understand human experience and what's possible as a human being, right? What are the was it Abraham Maslow talked about the outer limits of possibility of being human, and and I think that's what we're doing in this program, cleverly disguised as something that you can deploy at work or in your life. And in order to make that happen, you have to have structures to support that aliveness. And um, because one is that we're not living in our parents' or grandparents' world anymore. I mean that should be more than obvious. And so therefore the world of stability and the world where we can kind of plan 5 or 10 years ahead, that world doesn't exist. And so what we have to do instead is adapt and create new frameworks to account for that. And one of them is like intentionally growing yourself, growing your aliveness in a face of challenge. I think that crisis is a growth industry. And how do we build structures to account for that so that we learn how to grow from these experiences rather than be damaged by them.
I'm going to share something personal here just for a moment, Jeremy, that feels important to me, because one of the things that I found about the green zone is that that's the place where I feel at the heart level, I'm connected with whomever I'm working with or whatever I'm working on. And if I'm in the red zone protecting or defending, or if I'm, shutting down, my heart is not online in the same kind of way. I'm not available, not just for connecting with other people, but for connecting with what I care the most about. Yeah. And sometimes for me, what helps me get back into the green zone is just to say my heart has something it needs to say right now, just to share a bit more, to be myself, to be authentic. So here we go. When I introduced you and I said, well, all the people all the time aren't going to say, Jeremy Hunter is my favorite professor, I didn't explain myself very well. And so I want to go back and just give a little bit more explanation to that, which is I learned this from someone in the area of conscious marketing, which is if everybody thinks 100% of the people love you and think you're terrific, you're not taking a strong enough stand for anything. Like when you actually take a stand for what you care the most about, that will actually potentially repel some people, but it will also attract the people who connect with who you are. So that was the full explanation I didn't get to do at the beginning. Now, why am I saying that now? I'm saying that now because I want to be fully in a vital green zone with you and with all the people who have joined us as part of this conversation. And I think where this leads to have you comment on it is what you found the capacities we have as leaders, as managers, when we're in the green zone? What does that give us that we can share, and how do we lead and inspire in a different kind of way?
Yeah. Well, I can talk from my own experience about that. One is, let's just take some of the obvious things. Right? One is just calm, and that calm is contagious. And but there, I think there we can get. Do you want to talk about the esoteric aspects of it, or the? I mean, because there's all kinds of places we could go with this. One is, to be frank, a kind of meeting a situation in a loving way, and that can be totally transformative for people. As I mentioned with the house thing, there's a fellow I had to deal with who was the kind of insurance guy, and I think he was absorbing hundreds and hundreds of people's anger and anxiety, and I decided he wasn't going to absorb mine, and I just loved my way through the conversation with him, and told him how much I appreciated him, and how, like, I hope after he goes home from work he's doing something to take care of himself, because he's had to listen to uh, you know uh, people in pain all day. And the minute I said that, everything changed in that conversation. Like, suddenly he regained his humanity, and it was fascinating to watch. I think that's one. I think second is that as you become more attuned to your body, your capacity for intuitive insight increases, and that you'll get answers to things that you can't explain how you got the answer to it, but it's there. And I'll be frank, that's absolutely been true for me. And then I think the other thing that I've noticed is like an unceasing rolling set of synchronicity that happens. Like, when you are in the green zone, you are also more coherent with the environment around you, and that you find that environment is actually a responsive one, not one of randomness and disinterest. Um,
And I would add maybe decision-making capacity, that
Absolutely.
actually part of our brain that can engage in complex executive functioning is better empowered, capable, and is only actually online when we're in the green zone.
Right.
It's not fully available to us if we're in the red zone or the gray zone. So in terms of results, the ability to see clearly and make good decisions. Okay, it's very compelling to want to be a positive contagion as a green zone leader. Give us a practice we can do right now, if you will, Jeremy, to help people understand this model more in their own experience.
Sure. And this is a super simple one. So, and that evolves through time. So what you might experience now may not be what you would experience 6 months from now if you did this regularly. Um, just notice, I'm going to assume everybody's sitting down. And if you're driving, don't do this. But but first, just notice where, and these are, as we started earlier, these are nervous system exercises, not intellectual exercises. So they're conceptually very simple, which is, let's just start with step one. It's like, where are your feet? And are your feet and your head in the same room? Right? That's step one. And then underneath your feet, there's probably a floor. And so you can sense into that place where your feet connect to the floor. And then beneath that, there's probably something solid. And that what happens when you tune into that quality of solidity. Right? And like, notice, what is solidity like? It doesn't change. It's not asking anything from you. And it's supporting you. Right? So let's just take a minute to sense into that. And then you can add in the chair that you're sitting in. And then notice where your body is making contact with the chair. And then also notice that you don't have to do anything other than just receive the support the floor and the chair are giving you. You don't have to perform for it. And then if you want, you can take the palms of your hands, like I talked about earlier, and then put them on the tabletop in front of you or on your lap if you don't have a tabletop. And then just sense into it. Like sense into what does this solidity feel like? And then as you do that, notice, what does your body want to do? Maybe your body wants to like shake or run or move or stretch. And then, you can do that. We're not doing Zen, right? So like, oh, if you notice you want to stretch your shoulders or something, like just notice, what does your body want? Go for it. And like when you sense into the solidity, you might also find that, oh, this isn't enough. And that what you really want to do is go lie down on the floor, which is totally okay. But what happens when you sense into this unchanging, undemanding sensation? I think that for many of us, we kind of come back into ourselves. And that part of what, especially, I think leaders face is being in a world of constant demand is not just an issue of being in a kind of defensive state all the time. I think it's also an issue of being in a disoriented state. Like when you're in constant motion and everything's changing, the technology changing, your workplace is changing, everything's changing. How do you actually orient to, as you just talked about, make good decisions? And I find this super simple practice of just coming back to sensations of solidity, where something is unchanging and undemanding, and right there can be transformative, right? You can do this anywhere. You can do it if you're hanging on a strap on the train. You can do that. And when I'm driving, I actually use the steering wheel as the solidity. But they're just ways of really reorienting yourself.
Wonderful practice. Thank you, Jeremy. It's amazing how, and maybe you could stop sharing here. And
oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah. It's amazing how that was just a few minutes, how that shifts our state. And I notice here the community, and I can feel it in the space between us. And I wonder if you can talk a bit more about what people do when they're in the room with people who are in red and gray zones. And is it just this further anchoring? You mentioned our physiology trumps psychology, like that in and of itself, our physiology will communicate this, or what do we do? So many people around us are coming in so distressed about so many different things. What do we do besides the contagion effect to support other people to be in the green zone?
Yeah, I think talking about it, like just talking about red zone, green zone, gray zone, helps give people tools to make sense with what's going on inside them. And um, because oftentimes they don't know. But I think having a regular way to talk about it, I know almost every leader I work with will introduce this as part of their weekly meeting. What zone are we in? And then, and what that does, I think, is increase the level of honesty that the team is capable of, because they're red zone, green zone, gray zone doesn't sound like therapy, and it doesn't sound kind of touchy feely. And I think that's why people feel more comfortable using it in the workplace. And it doesn't also sound like an admission of weakness. So it's it makes, I think, reality more discussable. Like, okay, if I know a third of the team is in the red zone, okay, now what are we going to do about it? Let's do something about it, and let's talk about why.
And to the point that I made, something interesting happens when you comment on the zone that you're in. You suddenly start feeling connected to other people because you're sharing what's really going on for you. And this co-regulation effect happens by honest, truthful sharing about the fact that you're not in the green zone brings you into the green zone.
Yeah. And we all get to be human, right? We all get to be human.
Yeah. Okay, another question someone wrote in. What if you're masking your green zone? Masking it. Everyone on the team then feels like they're in the green zone. This is the person's comment. But you are actually in the red zone. And this leads over time to burnout. You're masking, you're pretending to be calm because that's your job. But you're not really calm.
Yes. Right. So I guess, why are you doing that? And I guess that goes back to structure. And so there's another thing that is a subtler aspect of this, which is, what are all the rules that you have in your head that say you're not allowed to be in the green zone? There always will be a certain percentage of people that'll say, oh, I peek through the window of the green zone, but I never let myself actually go into the room, or I visit, but I don't stay. I'll, and I think that's also cross-cultural too. That's not just an American thing. And it's a kind of interesting lines in the program we have that say, okay, I'm not actually allowed to be happy. and maybe that deserves further exploration. But your it is definitely true. I'm allowed to be happy. Let me just go through the list of what oftentimes shows up. I'm allowed to be happy when everything else is okay. Or I'm not allowed to be happy if there's suffering in the world. I think that's a very common one. But versus your capacity to be in the green zone helps you address the suffering in the world better. I think the other thing is that there's a moment where that Gandhi bumper sticker, be the change you want to see in the world, really kind of hit home for me, in that, oh, what he's really talking about, I think, is that you're being the change you want to see in the world is you acting as a broadcasting tower to everyone else around you. And Joseph Campbell, the great mythologist, said that vital people vitalize. And it's true for leaders too. Vital leaders vitalize. And I think the reason they vitalize is that they're broadcasting a frequency that people can pick up on and take for themselves. And so then you have this kind of networked effect. It was in the slide I showed earlier, like the green zone can spread as well, which is why I'm essentially an optimist. Not having been born an optimist, I have become an optimist because of just seeing this process over and over again.
Okay, and then one question, and then we'll go to some final questions that have come in later. What have you found in the people who have built the capacity of living, as you said, as the default state? The norm is the green zone. That's my norm. Of course, I go other places. I come back. That's my norm. How have they done it? How do people do it?
One is having an unflinching capacity to face your own pain and to make a conscious decision to heal it. As my friend Marcelo Woodrig says, make a deal with yourself to that you will allow yourself to temporarily experience discomfort in service to your long-term growth and evolution. And it's interesting, ironically, maybe like the capacity to be in the green zone is also directly proportional to your capacity to deal with discomfort. And the metabolization of the discomfort is what actually redeposits all that stuck energy that was stuck into defense and not feeling, goes back into aliveness. And that what I find is that those people then start to spiral in a positive direction, and that it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I'll say that's probably true for my own life as well.
I want to let you all know that Jeremy Hunter, as I mentioned, is one of the core faculty members of the InnerMBA, and we have others who are joining with him to build what is a 6-month container. So it's not just about inspiration or just about, hacks, practices you can do on the spot. It's an actual 6-month transformational, I would call it a crucible, to Jeremy's point about the willingness to be in the fire, steady under fire of our pain, of the discomfort of our time, the discomfort of our communities, of our own histories, and allow all of that to forge us into someone who is this vital person, a positive contagion in the world. I want to tell you a little bit more about the program and some of the other faculty members who are joining us. And then we have another set of questions that we've received that I'll go over with you. It's a 6-month certificate program. And as I mentioned, it's been developed in consultation with the Greater Good Science Center. What's awesome is the Greater Good Science Center is bringing the science that meets wisdom. And this is what really helps us understand flourishing at work in today's world. The InnerMBA, it begins on October 23rd through the 25th with an in-person event at the International House at UC Berkeley. It's 3 days, and it's also going to be streamed online. So you can come in person to the UC Berkeley campus, or you can stream the opening event online. This is then followed by 6 months together, as I said, in our shared crucible. That's October through April. It's about 60 to 90 minutes a week of inner work, learning, and community. 6 modules. There's a quiet week within each module to let everything settle. There's monthly live teachings, small groups, and a new addition to the InnerMBA, one-to-one coaching with a coach who is yours for the whole 6 months. You finish with a certificate of completion that's issued by Sounds True. Just to say a little bit more about the faculty, we'll be joined by Melissa Bernstein, who's the entrepreneur in residence for the InnerMBA. She's the founder of Melissa and Doug Toys, now a new company called Lifelines. She's brilliant at helping creators bust through whatever challenges they have. We're also joined by Raj Sisodia, who's one of the co-founders of the Conscious Capitalism movement. Some very successful entrepreneurs and CEOs who have balanced profit and purpose, money and meaning. We could say also being strategic and surrendering to the flow of life. Chip Conley, who worked as the strategic advisor for Airbnb. He's the founder of the Modern Elder Academy. Lorna Davis, who ran Danone North America. She set it up as the largest B Corp in North America. Tremendous CEO. And we're also going to be joined this year by Dick Schwartz. who's the founder of Internal Family Systems. That's a way that we learn how to be more self-led, which is a different way of talking about the green zone, being in our true self while we're at work. It's a great faculty. Each year there are some new guest members and a core trajectory that we go through together. Jeremy, are you ready now for some more questions? What do you think?
Sure. I will say that the program has changed my life for sure. And through people I've met, and it's been a absolutely wonderful part of my life, I would say. So thank you, Tami, for letting me stay on the island. It's a nice little island, and it's yeah, it has been absolutely life-changing for me. And
how
so
has
I'm
it been
sure that
life-changing?
I get to meet the most incredible people, and some of whom have become very close friends, and to hear their stories. You know, it's really the power of the stories of the people, and that I find to be the most transformative. And that I think what we do as the faculty is like catalyze that, and then the participants are also their own kind of ecosystem of support and development. And I think that's so the value of it has been, for me, really just absolutely delightful.
And just to let people know, you can go to innermba.soundstrue.com. You can learn more. We have some questions coming in asking about the pricing of the program and tiers. It's all laid out for you on the website, innermba.soundstrue.com. You can just take the online curriculum, or you can come join us at the UC Berkeley campus for the live event, followed by the 6 months online. So it's all laid out again, innermba.soundstrue.com. And that's also where you can apply to join the program as well. Okay, a few more questions.
Sure.
How do I tell the difference between being in the gray zone and just being tired?
I think, well, probably being tired is an expression of the gray zone, but if it's going on for a long time, then I would start to ask, what are the support structures that you have, including the quality of your sleep, which is probably the most important thing that you have in your life.
Is red always bad? I get a lot done in the red zone.
Not always bad, and that's true. And I think that's why we oftentimes default to it, because we do get a lot of things done. It is incredibly costly, though. And where it could be costly is, what are the signals you're sending to other people? What are things you're doing that other people actually should be doing? I mean, I know a lot of micromanaging leaders that are in the red zone, and they take up stuff that they should not be doing, and that the team should be doing. So I think that I will say that as a former red zone dweller, it absolutely does give you unearthly powers to get things done, but those powers are incredibly costly, and that it is much better and more fun to do it from the green zone.
What would you say to someone who says, I feel sometimes like I'm in a mixed place, partially red, partially green? It feels like a mixture to me.
Yeah, I'd say yeah, me too. That's probably not untrue. And I think the key is what you talked about earlier, Tami, was like the awareness of that. And
Right.
And to say that none of these are bad, right? Like, you're not a bad kid if you are in the red zone, because or in the gray zone. It's just that those places are not meant for long-term residency, right? They're short-term occupancy places, and oftentimes, too often, we make them into lifestyles, and they're not meant to be lifestyles.
I'm going to go to some more participant questions in a moment, but one thing I'm curious about, Jeremy, I want to make sure we get to this, is how you see the time we're in terms of the increased pressures people are under, and is there something trying to be born at this point in time, and in business specifically? Is there something trying to be born through our work with each other that's new, that's different?
Yeah, I think absolutely. Right. And as I said earlier, uh, crisis is a growth industry. And so then the question is, how do you use crisis? I mean, that's really been it's actually been the animating question my entire adult life, is to how do we use this inescapable encounter with pain and difficulty as a stimulus to our own evolution as humans uh, on this planet. And it's clear that our institutional frameworks are failing, that they're not working. Somebody had a question about what happens if I work in medical, in the medical world, which, as we know, the kind of chronic stress creating place. And um, it's not working. And so we have to shift ourselves into, first as individuals and then as institutions, into frames that are actually more livable and workable. I'm in Japan right now, actually, and I've been here for a month, and I come a lot. And what's interesting is there's something evolving here that I don't hear anything about in the United States, which are questions about how do we evolve together? How do we face the future together? What is communal well-being like? How do we create structures where we all can move forward? And I've been in multiple rooms with completely different people from completely different places, and they're all asking the same question. And I think that's the future. That's the future. Like, how do we do this together? And I think that's what is wanting to emerge. I would say that in my own life of facing and metabolizing pain, what nobody ever tells you is that on the other side of that pain are things you can't imagine be possible, right? Which is a kind of sense of care and love and groundedness and rootedness that then begin to animate your life. And I'm very curious to see what happens when that starts to occur on a larger scale, which I think is already starting to happen. You're seeing it. It's just not in the news. The fact that there's an InnerMBA program to begin with, I think, is a sign of optimism. I'll say that when I first started teaching nearly 30 years ago, as you talked about before, to talk about your inner life was an absolute taboo. Like, even to acknowledge that there was an inner life and that it had anything to do with your outer life was like unheard of. People would walk away from me at parties when I would tell them what I did for a living. And I think I was talking to some younger people in their 20s and saying, sounding like an old fart, saying, 30 years ago, when you talked about meditation practice, people walked away from you. Now it's just normal. And that's a huge shift that we have to absolutely keep in the forefront of our mind, has happened in our lifetime. And that's an amazing thing. The fact that this program exists and that there are hundreds of people on this webinar interested in it is an amazing thing. And so we shouldn't take that for granted, because there is something shifting.
I remember speaking to someone who also teaches within the business school world, and he said, Tami, what you're offering in the InnerMBA is what is going to be taught in business schools in 10 years. It has to be what's taught, because more and more automation and smart machines will be able to do a lot of the computation that we used to teach executives. What we're going to need are business executives and leaders and managers who know how to solve human problems, connect conflicts, create in absolutely brand new ways that can't be replaced by any kind of smart machine. And I wonder how you see that.
Absolutely. I mean, the Drucker School, what makes the Drucker School special is that that is really the front and center of our curriculum. And so that and that it's geared toward creating a functional society. And so you can't have a functional society without a functional nervous system. And that I think when we redefine the leader of the future, or let's just define the leader that we need today, is a human being that has a deep and capacious nervous system to be able to function in what will increasingly be choppy times. What are choppy times, right? And so, but the interesting thing is, I'm not so optimistic about business schools. I don't think it'll be 10 years. And I was in a meeting earlier this year, sponsored by Harvard Business School. And what a lot of business schools face is that there isn't a place in the curriculum to actually put in courses about developing you, which I found to be absolutely fascinating. That there isn't, the knowledge has become so fragmented that, like, where do we put it in the curriculum? We have no idea. And that's why a program like this one is absolutely essential, because it steps out of traditional institutional boundaries that say, hey, no, look, guys, we need to shift trajectory entirely. And I think that's the power that brings, to be quite frank with you.
Again, friends, come and learn more. InnerMBA.SoundsTrue.com. Our 6-month program begins at the end of October. We would love to have you join us in person or online for the October 23rd, 25th opening weekend. This is our container together at a time when we need it. I don't know, Jeremy, about you, but for me, I've had to increase my focus on green zone living more than ever in response to the collective shaking ground underneath us. I don't know if that's true for you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's where having to do it consciously is so helpful. Like it's not something you leave for when everything else gets done. It's something that should be there on your calendar right now.
And that we need each other for.
Yeah.
We need each other. And
hugging helps.
Hugging's really good. Okay, friends, thank you so much. Thanks for being with us. And I hope something has come from this that has helped increase your sense of solidity. I love the hands on the table, feet on the earth, feeling that and being that kind of positive contagion in your world. Thanks, Jeremy.
Got to do. Thank you, Tami.
Thank you. Thanks, friends. Thanks for being with us.